fight for gay rights in the United States has come a long way since the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, when gay and trans patrons of the Stonewall Inn in New York City fought back against police trying to arrest them. For some, that night marked the beginning of the gay rights movement in the United States. A decades-long fight that just a few years ago resulted in the momentous 2015 Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriages. But that 2015 decision didn't end the struggle for equality and protection. Just this year alone, 250 laws have been introduced in state legislatures that discriminate against gays and lesbians. Today, we are asking, why the attack on the LGBTQ community? All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
The LGBTQ community in the U.S. continue to face legalized discrimination under the law when it comes to housing, jobs, parenting, and even prison. The community also continues to face an epidemic of violent crimes, particularly against transgender women of color. 13 have been killed just this year alone for no reason other than being trans. In a vast majority of states, kids can still be sent to so-called conversion therapy, and many LGBTQ youth suffer from mental health and substance abuse issues, in part because of the discrimination that they face. And although June is National Pride Month, a month when we celebrate how far the U.S. has come in recognizing gay rights, there is still much work to be done to ensure that the equal rights and dignity of LGBTQ are recognized under the law. My first guest today is Dr. Doveal Goins. She is a therapist and author of the book, You Mean I Can Have God and Be Gay. Full disclosure, Doveal is my niece, and I'm so excited to sit down with her this morning. Good morning and welcome to the show, Dr. Dove.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this opportunity.
So you and I obviously have talked a lot about your sexuality and you coming out to your family, to our family, coming out in the Black community, and particularly the Black church, which is so much a part of your upbringing that you wrote a book about it. So I just want to start by asking you, this is Pride Month. What does this month mean for you?
A celebration from oppression. It's a form of freedom. It's a way to say I'm who I am. I accept who I am. I'm proud of who I am, and it's really an awesome opportunity to connect with. I like to call family. I distinguish between relative and family because I feel like family is connected, and whoever is supportive and understanding and is accepting, those are things that are very important on this journey. So when we get together for pride parades and festivals, it just feels like a real sense of community and acceptance where you get to be yourself. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to pretend to be, something else. And it's not much judgment there, although there is some judgment within the community. It's really a place to be free and be authentically you.
So you weren't always able to be that authentic person that you just talked about, that freedom that you just described. Help us understand what your journey, you are an adult now, you are a therapist working, you have your psychology degree, your psychology doctorate, so you're actually in the field of counseling. But help us understand what your journey of coming out, as people typically talk about it. What was that journey like for you?
Okay, so it started kind of later than I think a lot of people are understanding it. Maybe in my 10th grade year of high school was when I began to feel different, feel like, I'm not just attracted to guys. before then, it wasn't ever an option. It was never presented as something that was okay for me to feel, to think about, and definitely to not accept. So I did not come out in high school. That was back in the 90s, the early 90s. No one really in my school was out. It wasn't until I went away to college, when you get a little bit more liberties away from the family, away from the religion, that's when I got a chance to explore my sexuality. Initially, I did not come out. I was outed by someone that I knew who informed the church group and the family that I was gay. And at that point, I was strongly encouraged to leave a Division I basketball scholarship, move back home, go to community college, and stay under the safe haven of the church, so to speak. And as a result, I dealt with a lot of internal homophobia. I deal with depression. It led to me trying to cope in a number of different ways. All because I felt like, well, God doesn't love me, because in the religion that I grew up in, it was not acceptable for you to be gay by any stretch. So I began on this journey of self-love. I was trying to understand myself. I didn't want to feel like I had to choose between a faith and my feelings, toward women. So I sat down and I read the Bible for myself, because usually what we get is a lot of tradition and someone's interpretation. And I felt like, well, if I'm going to adhere to a system or a faith or a belief, then I better know about it myself. I better, pursue it myself. So I looked into it. And that's when I began the journey to write my book, You Mean I Can Have God and Be Gay, which was me coming to not only the understanding that God is accepting and is love, but that I needed to love and accept myself. I spent a lot of time saying that others rejected me. And what I've learned in my counseling, because I didn't even think I could interview or counsel people who were LGBTQ because I was so insecure about my own status. So I determined that I wasn't going to work with that population. And even when I first started doing counseling, I was asked to remove all of my gay posts or anything that resembled showing that I was gay, because they really wanted me to reach out to the Black church community out here when I moved out to Maryland. So for like the first year, it's like I had to go back in the closet, and I was out at that time. And after I got a little bit more comfortable, and I realized that I'm now drawing, I became comfortable with myself. I wrote the book, and I was like, all right, I'm coming out. I was coming all the way out of the closet. So, and it's so funny because since then, it's been a shift where I've actually had, and you mentioned it, where there was someone brought in their kid because the kid was talking about being bisexual, and was a young preteen, and they're like, oh, she's too young to know that, and I'm thinking, you wouldn't say that if she was talking about a boyfriend or a boy she liked. So and a lot of times people don't even see the small microaggressions and the discrimination that they have within themselves. So
wait a second, Dove. I want to take you back, Dr. Dove. I want to take you back because you talked about religion. You talked about reading the Bible. You talked about having to leave a Division I school where you were playing sports in college to come home to be under the auspices of your family in this church. We know that the Black church in particular, and other churches too, but we're going to talk specifically about the Black church because you grew up in Black church, has a really complicated relationship with the gay community. While many pastors condemn gay and lesbians in their church from the pulpit, with these fire and brimstone sermons, behind them, oftentimes sitting in their choir stands, are members of their choirs who are gay, and oftentimes the pastors, we later learn, may have had some relationship with a man or maybe gay himself. So help us understand the got to call it what it is, hypocrisy that exists in many, not all. We're not going to condemn all churches, but the hypocrisy that exists in a lot of Black churches.
I would attribute that to a hierarchy of sins that they've come up with, where it's like these sins are rated more highly. Like you being gay just seems to be at the top of the list. I mean, someone could commit murder and spend some time and then come out, and the church is, ooh, let's bring you, let's celebrate, or a young person can get pregnant and not be married, and then well, we're all at the baby shower and we're celebrating, and it's like. I know I read in the Bible, if you commit one sin, you're guilty of them all. So by that standard of what they're asking the LGBTQ to be upheld to, everybody would be going to hell. Nobody would be safe. But people don't know that because they're not teaching that. They're just teaching, well, these are visible sins. We're not talking about matters of the heart, and we're definitely not talking about love, and which they say God is, but I mean, like you said, in the Black church, it's a whole lot of hypocrisy and a whole lot of judgment.
And I feel like in the Black church, and I've been in the Black church pretty much all of my adult life, so I've seen this firsthand, that there's kind of this don't ask, don't tell policy, where everybody knows, who in the church is gay. They whisper about it, but the church doesn't want to expel those folks, and sometimes it's for monetary reasons. Other times it's because they want to keep their numbers high, or whatever the reasons. But the people who are gay have to live in secrecy, live a lie. That is, as I know you studied it as a psychologist, is very harmful, very traumatizing to that individual. What was that like for you, having to have these feelings, know that people in your church knew you were gay, but couldn't talk about it, couldn't reveal, couldn't be who you really were?
That was challenging because I found myself in the same hypocritical state. So like back in 98, I think it was, with California Prop 8, where they were voting on gay marriages. I had a girlfriend, but I was voting in favor of not allowing gay marriages because I had that duality going on within me. It's like, I feel this way, but I can't feel this way, So in my mind, if I didn't support it openly, then I wasn't condoning it. I wasn't accepting it, So there is that kind of don't ask, don't tell, like even in the military of how it was before. And I spent a few months in that situation during that time when they had the don't ask, don't tell policy. And the fact of the matter is, we're everywhere, and we're in all of the, the churches, and being forced to be quiet while watching other people do the same thing is frustrating. It takes a toll on your self-esteem because you don't really have too many people that you can talk to about it. Now you do. It's getting better. And so I think that it's really important to emphasize more so self-esteem and self-love and self-acceptance. That's what I've learned.
I feel like in a church, oftentimes there's this notion of tolerating. Like they know people are gay and they tolerate them, but it's not full acceptance. And one thing that I think about Pride Month is being a month where we're trying to teach people the difference between tolerating someone and accepting them for who they are. Have you gotten to the point where you think your church or churches like the church you grew up in have moved from that we will tolerate you to we fully embrace and accept you?
In some situations with some family members and church members and friends, I've seen it evolve. I've seen it transformed. Initially, if you came out in a way, you were ostracized. I found that when I did come out, I was no longer allowed to play the instruments in the church or sing in the choir. But as long as you stay hush-hush about it, then we can pretend like it doesn't exist. Eventually, that led me to leaving the church. Not my faith or my religion, my relationship with God, but just the religious aspect of, the condemnation and guilt, shaming, and things like that. So as long as I was keeping it quiet, then I could be tolerated. It's like that saying, oh, will we hate the sin, but love the sinner, but hate the sin, right? And I'm like, that's like eat the donut, but don't get the calories. But it's not. It's just not gonna. There's no separation. It's a package deal. You understand? Like, this is who I am, and there's not opportunities for marriage counseling. There's church retreats, and places that I wanted to go to, that I wanted to bring my girlfriend with, and I was, told no, we can't, condone that. But I'm like, I don't understand. We have other non-married couples, and I know that's in there too. They call that fornication. I'm confused. And so once I started to ask those questions and confront the different ones who were telling me this, they didn't have an answer. Yeah. They didn't, and a lot of times they said we're trying, it's a work in progress, but they expected me to do nothing and not live my authentic life while they're a work in progress. And I was like, that's not working for me. So I'm going to go on my own journey and get this relationship that I need with myself and with my God.
So I'm looking at you, Dr. Dove, having known you since you were really young and having, been a part of your journey as you were grappling with your sexuality and feeling this confident. And I see now this really confident, self-assured, woman who is living her authentic self. But I think back, to you as a teenager, and I think about other teens who are in environments like the one you were in where you were not accepted. Tell us what the psychological, now that you're a therapist, what does that do psychologically to a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, 16-year-old who cannot tell their parents, or those that maybe have told their parents and have been, some we know are beaten, are, thrown out of their homes and totally ostracized in their communities. What does that do to the mental health of a young gay person?
No, it contributes to a lot of what are typical diagnosis of depression and anxiety. So now you interject a feeling of rejection and non-acceptance. These kids are looking for somebody that's going to accept them. They're looking for somebody who's going to love them and not tell them, no, that's not who you are. I have a lot of transgender clients. And as a matter of fact, I'm starting my first group this Saturday with kids from about 12 to 18 who are LGBTQ, so that we can start discussing some of their issues with themselves. That's a primary thing that I really want to push. I understand going out into the streets and fighting for our rights, but a lot of times that internalized homophobia that sits with them, it's like, you reject me, so then I reject me, and that leads to things like cutting and substance abuse and eating disorders and promiscuous behavior and running away because I can't stay in, it doesn't feel safe. And then a lot of times my parents who are not accepting are wondering, well, why won't my kid talk to me? Or how come they are reaching out to internet friends in other countries and those are the people they're feeling connected to? Because those are the people that are accepting them. Those are the people that are saying it's okay for you to be who you are. And you don't even have to know fully, because I've had kids who have been, they first started off and I thought, oh, I'm straight. And then it was like, no, I'm trans. And now I'm not so sure. And then the parents are like, well, you don't know. And it's like, that's our whole growth process. When I first started, I thought I was straight, but that's all I was ever told that I could be. And as it went on and I started to develop the feelings, I was like, okay, well, I'm bi. And then as I got older and I really began to accept myself, I'm like, nah, I'm pretty much a lesbian. So, it was an evolution that took, 20 to 30 years. So I understand that these kids need to be supported as they learn and define themselves and their identity, and telling them they're not okay, they're not worthy. That's not instilling hope. And that's just perpetuating that cycle of discrimination, but it's them having to carry it within themselves and, without even knowing that they are. And so that's one of the messages I like to promote with the kids. It's like, this is your self-love. It's really important.
Yeah, I just love you. I'm just sitting here. I'm so happy. I'm so excited because you have embraced who you are, and you're living your truth, and you're doing it in such an amazing way. You've written this book so you can have God and be gay, and you are such a bright light, and I can't thank you enough for sitting down and sharing your story with me. And tell us where people can find your book and how they can connect with you online.
It's on, I have it on Amazon. I don't know if this is backwards with this, because sometimes on the Zoom it shows up as backwards. But I did the dove on the top with the cross here, and I put the equality rings around the bottom of it to show, because these are like your LGBTQ equality rings. And I wanted to show that that you can be connected, because we all need something to believe in, whether it's God or source or universe, higher self. We need something that to believe in and to hold on to. And my faith has been a big part of my journey. It has not been separate from it, although there were moments where I kind of went away, but ultimately it was what I needed. So, and I remember you were the first person to ask me when I was a teenager if I was gay. And I remember answering, oh, no, like, what are you talking about? Where are you coming with this? Like, you perhaps saw it. And I think that was really, once I got older and I began to understand, I saw that you were trying to embrace me. And one of the first, and at that time, only people who was looking to extend, yourself to me, because I think you saw where I was struggling, and now here I am, I'm advocating, I think I'm gayer than I've ever been. I don't know if you can get gayer by the day, but here I am.
I love it. Yes, I saw something in you, and you are proving me right each and every day. So keep standing in your truth, and thank you. Everyone, go to Amazon, buy this book. If you're out there and you're struggling with your faith and, being your authentic self, this book is going to help you. It's going to lift you up in so many ways. Have a wonderful Pride Month, Dr. Dove, and keep being that bright light, particularly for those kids. I love to hear that you have that group going. That's amazing.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. Good to see you again.
All right, you too.
All right. My next guest is here, and I'm so excited. This is, I don't know, I'm getting to spend time this morning with people I love and I care about, and I feel like I've been a part of their journey. My next guest is fashion designer Eduardo Lucero. He's an extraordinary fashion designer. He's worked with pretty much everybody in the music and entertainment industry. He's dressed, Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson and some of the biggest names out there. And he came out in his very small Midwestern town to his very Latino Catholic family. Oh, we got to talk to him about what that was like. Good morning and welcome to the show, Eduardo.
Good morning, Areva. So nice to see you.
All right, Eduardo. Again, I like my niece, Doveal. I feel like I know your story, and it's so impactful because, my niece is a Black woman in a very conservative Black church. Here you are, a little Mexican boy in a Midwestern town with a very Catholic Latino family. So what was your journey like of coming into your authentic self and having to tell your parents that you were gay?
Well, I think number one, like growing up in the Midwest, you already feel ostracized because you're not, at the time where I grew up, we were basically almost the only white family in our town. So you already feel like you don't belong. And growing up and feeling that you're different is also very difficult because not only are you Latino, like even in my family, they made a distinction between you being a Latino in the U.S. and being an immigrant. We were the immigrants. So we had immigrated to the U.S. And with that comes a lot of burden. I think, being an immigrant places a lot of pressure on you. Like you have to succeed for all the struggles that your parents are struggling, because you're literally arriving into a new country, all of us together. So you don't want to disappoint them. So that's always like a big stress on your back. But I came out to my parents when I was a sophomore in college. So I wasn't technically living at home, and I went home for Christmas, and my mother saw that. She's like, you don't act like yourself anymore. You don't talk very much. You just keep to yourself. You don't seem happy anymore. And she kept pushing that night before Christmas over and over until I finally broke down. I started crying, and I told her that I thought that I might be gay. And my mom I don't think she had even registered for her. But she's like, she was just trying to calm me down. And, but, once she figured out what was going on, she's like, I don't really understand what this is, but whatever it is, you have to tell your father tomorrow, which I wasn't prepared really to come out. And so, but I was really blessed that my parents did the best possible thing when that next morning came out. My father basically hugged me and let me go. It was early in the morning and said, he's like, okay, go back to bed. And he never really addressed the subject matter at all because, he never really treated me any differently than that. I think the difficult thing for them was they did not really understand what it was that I was trying to tell them. But more importantly, the thing that they did correct is that they were willing to find out before making any judgment. And more than anything, not only my parents, but all of my family, I think they knew me as a person because I was always with all my aunts and all my uncles and my cousins. So they knew me as a person. So I think that really helped. So they saw me as a person rather than necessarily a label.
When I think of, the Mexican culture, Eduardo, you can't help but think of the big M word, right? Machismo.
Oh, yeah.
You know how terrible
huge.
that culture, and this whole culture about men being strong and aggressive and suppressing any signs of, of feminine tendencies. So how are you, Southmoreland College, young Latin immigrant, dealing with the pressures of this culture that says you got to be, macho at all times?
Well, one of the interesting things for me is I'm not the only gay person in my family. Out of 4 children, I also have a gay sister. And she's very, very much embraces her masculine side. So even growing up, it was kind of strange for me because I didn't know she was gay. I just knew that she was way more manly than I could ever be. So in a way, I felt doubly humiliated, at the time, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even as masculine as my sister, who's 1 year younger than me. Obviously, she eventually came out years later, and then I was like, okay, now it makes sense. But no, the machismo is very, very, it's a big burden because, we have a saying in Mexico, when someone says something horrible to you, in order to say sort of like the F you to them, you say tu madre, which means literally your mother. But we use it in a derogatory sense to bring them down, and in a way it kind of makes the feminine part of our lives less important and less valuable in our lives, in our mind after growing up with that sort of mentality. So being associated with more of the feminine side was not necessarily looked upon as good. Where when my sister came out, I think she actually had a little bit of an easier time coming out because they almost look at it as the woman is empowering herself rather than losing power in the community.
Wow, that's deep. Your parents, we'll go back to them for a second. Do you think they knew before you came home for Christmas that sophomore year? Do you think they had any sense that either you or your sister were gay?
I don't know about my sister, but I know that I'm sure my mom always knew. She always knew that I was way more sensitive. My father put it very in an interesting way. He's like, I always thought you were just much more of a gentleman than all of the other kids. And I was like, a gentleman? I'm like, that's a very PC way to say it. But no, but, my parents, I think, did a really great job. I mean, years later now, it's also my responsibility to kind of educate them because they're in a small town, so they're not necessarily exposed to very much. So sometimes I also have to push the envelope with them and saying, look, it's already been, so many years that you have 2 gay children. Now it's time for you to start advocating for us also. You know, like for example, like a huge, like every once in a while we have disagreements and arguments, you know, and the last one was actually when the shooting at Pulse nightclub in Florida happened. And I was so upset. And, you know, most of them were Latino with a couple of like African American. And it was just like so devastating to me emotionally. And I remember I called home and my mom, it was like nothing, you know, and I told her, I'm like, you know, don't you feel anything for all of these people from our community that we lost? I mean, it's so devastating. And my mom's answer at the time was, I feel horrible for their parents. And that hurt me so much. I'm like, yes, for their loss, but what about the actual people who, you know, they lost? So that led to like a whole next level education for them too. So I know that, you know, they don't have access to a lot of that stuff. So the burden does come on you to help move the envelope, not only with them, but also with your family members, with your community. I just came back from visiting my parents in Illinois 2 days ago, you know, and I went to church with my mom, and my mom's like, oh, you know, that lady over there, you know, that I, you know, used to know me as a little kid. She's like, she also has a gay son now. And so she came and talked to me after church, and it's really emotional for them because like it helps for them to be able to visualize, hey, I know someone who is gay in my community, and they went out and they did something with their lives, you know, and we're not being judged by a label, we're being judged by what we can achieve.
So, Eduardo, and you've achieved a lot. Like in your intro, I talked about, you know, you being this amazing fashion designer. I know you spent some time in New York, and you were a part of the ballroom scene that Pose has now made so popular. You know, Pose, this incredible series that has educated us so much about what was going on in the AIDS community, in the LGBT community with respect to in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Help us understand, and I know given your age, we're not going to talk about how old you are, but I know you through that period.
I have plenty age to have experienced that, yes.
Yeah, what was that period like? A period, I mean, because on Pose, literally every episode someone's dying or they're going to a funeral. You know, I can't watch it without just weeping like a baby, you know, during most episodes.
Yeah, no, you know, it's the AIDS epidemic for us. I was in the middle in college, and we would be spending like our weekends were spent marching with ACT UP, which is AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. So we were out there, and that was even before I had even come out to my parents. So I always thought it was very strange. Like, here I am marching in streets, screaming about our rights, and I haven't even come out to my parents. And it was because, you know, the Reagan administration had completely like pretended like nothing was happening, and all these people were, you know, passing away. I know for me on my personal level, I would think I lost almost a third of all the people that I knew. I lost all my mentors, all the people that I looked up to. Everybody died. We sometimes would go to a funeral twice a week. But it traumatizes you not only in the idea of loss, but it also traumatizes you in, you know, having to survive. And you're like, well, why am I still here? You know, how if I've survived it, I'm okay. You know, it also puts a lot of pressure on you because you're like, okay, I have to make it so that it's worth why I'm still here. So I have to function and I have to achieve. But it was a very, very difficult time period for me.
So when you look now, you know, 2015, gay marriage is legalized, you know, huge, you know, legislative win for the gay community. But when you look over the last, say, 2 decades or so, what do you think for you is the most significant, you know, advancement that has been made in terms of, you know, the way people think and view the gay community?
I mean, obviously, you know, gay marriage is super, super important. But I think what's really happening is like we're getting more representation in the media. And that is really the way to reach out to those little families in the country and that are not in major metropolitan areas. You know, we forget sometimes because we do live in a metropolitan city that, you know, that is not what is going on in the rest of the country. You know, when I go back home to my little hometown of like 4,500 people, it is not the same thing. So it's the representation, I think, is super important. And I think that's really what's going to help us move forward the fastest right now. As long as, our new generation doesn't forget of everything that it's taken for us to get here. Because, like even just with this last administration where they were trying to take our equality and even getting like healthcare, you know what I mean? And being able to get treated if you go to a hospital, I'm like, are we still dealing with those kinds of issues even in 2021? It's very sad.
I'm glad you mentioned representation. Disney has come a long way. Obviously, there's a gay character in, its new movie Cruella.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I talked about Pose, and we can talk about so many other, film as well as TV series where we are seeing more. One of my favorite characters is on Schitt's Creek.
Yes, the best.
I'm obsessed with David. I mean, he is like everything to me. I love him. I thought I would hate the series, and I binged watched it, and I'm like such a big fan. Well, Eduardo, thank you so much again for sitting down with me, sharing your story. It just breaks my heart when you said you lost 1/3 of everybody that was in your life. We know that America, the United States, could have done so much more, so much faster. That discrimination that was so rampant and Pose does such a good job of revealing how ugly that period was and how gay people were just discarded by this nation. But I'm glad you survived, still standing tall, and helping that next generation not forget how many people lost their lives and sacrificed.
Well, you know what? I think that I'm extremely grateful that, me and the rest of my other friends, we have seen such a big change, and we have seen sort of like we've turned a corner. And that makes me extremely happy. So to end on a positive note, absolutely.
Last question for you. What do you want folks to know about Pride Month, and what does it mean to you?
I think the most important thing to me for Pride Month is not only about coming out, is what happens after you come out. When I talked to a young gay person coming out and they asked me, how should I come out? And I'm like, you should figure out plan what's going to happen after I come out. Even if you have a good experience with your parents and they're accepting and they're willing to learn and help you, the most important thing is your coming out is just as important on the months and the years after you come out. How you show yourself to your parents, show them that it's been a positive experience for you, become a better person, become a more open person, and then that you can really convince them through your actions rather than having to talk about them.
Good advice. Thank you so much, Eduardo. Always good to see you, my friend.
You're welcome. I love you.
Love you too, sweetie. Just love me some Eduardo Lucero, one of the best designers in the business, hands down, and just always inspired by his story. My next guest is also incredibly inspiring. His name is Yolo Akili Robinson. You've seen him on the show before. He's a mental health advocate and founder of Sweet Tea, Southern Queer Men's Collective, a collective of gay and queer men who came together to address racism and sexism in the LGBTQ community. And he's also the executive director and founder of the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. Good morning and welcome back to the show, Yolo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am just so in awe of the work that you do with young boys, African American and Latinos. You've won awards for your work. Major foundations have recognized your work. You've gotten incredible media attention around your work. But this morning I want to talk to you about being a Black gay male and what that journey was like for you coming out. I've talked to a Black female, who came out, had a very difficult time. And I just talked to Eduardo, coming from this small town in the Midwest. But you are here in Los Angeles, in what we think to be one of the most, progressive cities in the world. So how did Los Angeles treat you when you, revealed to the world that you were gay?
Yeah, no, great question. So full disclosure, I am a military brat. So my father was now retired 30 years, and so we lived a lot of different places, but I grew up in Augusta, Georgia for a great part of my life. And I often say this piece too, I think for a lot of Black queer and gay children, you know, some of us don't have the privilege of coming out because people look at us and be like, that child got some sugar in their tank real quick and early, right? Like, you know, we get seen as queer very early. And when I think about my experience, I definitely, like, you know, my families are Southerners, South Florida, deep Georgia people. I was definitely named queer very early on, right? And I think that people didn't necessarily, I mean, weren't explicit with saying it to me sometimes, but sometimes it would come through in conversation. And so for me, when I actually finally discussed with my parents that I was, you know, queer and gay, they were kind of like, child, like, you came out of here, we knew it, you know what I mean? And it didn't mean they didn't struggle with it, because I think that one piece that I always hold for, like, my mother and my father, I have to hold that, like, they grew up in environments where they were taught that being gay was one of the most horrible things you could be, right? That it was a terrible thing to be. And I know my father particularly was really scared for me, right? He had never witnessed Black queer people thriving and surviving in an environment that was so hostile, right? Where we grew up in. And so I know a lot of things that he did, and a lot of things I see sometimes a lot of Black parents doing. People like to say, oh, but it's all about homophobia. And I want to honor that can be a part of it, but also honor that sometimes it's also linked to this really deep fear of their safety for their child and wanting to socialize them in a way that, like, is about how can I keep you safe? And it can be deeply rooted in homophobia, but not always from a place of malice, but a place of really deep concern. And I think my father was like that for me and my mother. And, you know, we've had a long journey. You know, it was not easy in the beginning. By any stretch of the imagination, they struggled with it. I was very unapologetic and open, thankfully, to many advocates and folks who really inspired me to live in my truth. But we've worked on it. We've had difficult conversations. And, you know, now I'm going to turn 40 this year, and we're in a great place where I can talk about that, where I can bring partners that I've dated home with my father and my mother, and they're supportive, right? And I think it's important. I'm grateful that they've been able to work through their stuff. We've been able to work through our stuff together to get there. But I know that for a lot of folks, you know, in my work, I see they don't want to work through that stuff. They don't want to do that. And so many of our children, our families suffer because of that.
You know, Eduardo mentioned in the earlier segment about representation and how important representation is. So I think about shows like, you know, Fox's Empire, big blockbuster series, Lee Daniels show, probably one of the first where we saw a young Black lead, you know, Jamal Lyons, this very successful, you know, singer and hip hop mogul in some sense. And it was about revealing, you know, the LGBTQ issues in hip hop. How important do you think that character was, or Lee Daniels bringing that character to life was for particularly the Black community, Black gay community?
Oh my God, it was huge. I still remember that episode. I think that, like, struck such a big chord with so many people in my community and circle. It was the episode, I believe it was a poor part where his father like puts him in the trash can essentially in the episode, right? And I think yeah. And then, like, you know, his mother, Taraji, gets him out of there. That is a sentiment that I know so many of the young people of all ages that I have supported have experienced with their families, feeling tossed away, feeling thrown away, right? And seeing it kind of represented in the mainstream media in a Black show, I just remember we were like, whoa, because it brought that to the forefront, and it gave a lot of Black straight people who had not thought about the fact that we were having that experience all the time. They started thinking like, oh my God, how traumatic that can be, how jarring that can be. And even people who had did that to their own children, I remember in some of the groups I was facilitating, they were like, it was like seeing myself and what I did to my child on television. And that triggered something for them to show up differently. So we can never neglect that, how important that was, and also the role of art just helping us see ourselves, right?
You know, we faced a lot of, particularly in that first season, a lot of backlash, you know, anti-gay backlash, as well as Black folks saying, you know, you're painting us, you know, as homophobics, and that's not fair. But for some, it was the first time they maybe have seen a Black male, you know, Jamal have a partner. He kissed his partner, he made love to his partner, and engaged in, you know, stuff that partners do together. How important do you think that was to show not just that he was gay, but that he was, you know, actively involved in relationships?
Yeah, it's so important. I think that what happens with the ways in which homophobia and transphobia and these things work is they dehumanize us, right? People don't see the full range of who we are as human beings. And so when you see these stories that share the struggles, the unique challenges that show that, like, we have relationships, we do the same, we go through the same challenges or similar challenges, it humanizes us. It makes people be able to connect with us in a way that I think that the myths and the shame often counter, right? The myths and the shame say, I'm nothing like you, you are other, you are something out there. And then these kind of representations help people see a common humanity, which is so critical when we talk about addressing transphobia and homophobia and the stigmatizing attitudes. And I think it's so important to name that, like, so many of those attitudes come out of the fear and the forced socialization that is kind of beaten into us about what it means to be a man and a woman or a boy, right? Like, we get like I often talk about in our work in mental health, that at an early age, little boys get this message that you have to shut down your feelings, don't be anything that's considered feminine or expressive, and those things make you questionable, right? And that is a part that's linked to homophobia. And so what happens for a lot of people is that you see somebody acting in a way that you have had it beat into your whole life to not be, to repress, to fight against. And so seeing that person for many people triggers and activates the same thing that happened to them. So now I'm going to do to you what was done to me. And what was done to me was that I was beat down for walking with a switch. I was beat down for, wanting to play with dolls or play with makeup. And so there's definitely a psychological component to it that reflects the broader socialization we have,
Yolo, just debunk a couple of myths for me, for my viewers, for me, for people who, grow up being told, like you said, things are told to us and we internalize it. And one of the things we hear a lot, particularly, in the Black community, is that being gay is a choice. Almost like you can put it on and take it off like you do, your underwear. Help us understand why that is. I don't know if anybody would choose to be discriminated against, to be subjected to the kind of violence that the gay community experiences on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's always curious to me. I will say this, when I hear people who are heterosexual or people who've come to me and have been very adamant about choice, when I've interrogated them a little deeper, I found that they feel like they are making a choice. And I want to get that label, put that in, and they're making a choice to often repress a part of themselves, and so they believe that it's possible for others to make that choice, which is really a curious kind of conundrum, right? So I say that, I want to say that, I'm always curious about that framing of choice. It's like, did you make a choice? Are you making a choice to repress? We can make a choice to repress ourselves, but our desires stimulate from so many different psychodynamic parts of ourselves, right? So I think the piece that I say to the choice folks is, if it was a choice, why do we not allow humans to love how they love? What is that about? And for many people, their desires, their longings are not something that you consciously choose, that you force yourselves into, right? It's about your being. It is how we show up in the world. But even if it was a choice, I believe that humans should have the choice to be able to love who they want to love. And so I think even flipping that narrative and that concept on its head, and saying that however we show up with consent, with dignity and love for each other, I think is acceptable in our world.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put that. Now in 2021, there are so many new terms that I don't know if we were talking about 10 years ago. Non-binary, I think I read an article that says there are now 1.2 million people in the U.S. that identify as non-binary. And we saw Demi Lovato, big, pop singer, come out and say that she's non-binary. Help people understand what some of these different terms mean, because I think there's a lot of confusion, again, about, how to label people, how to address people, how to be politically correct.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm a non-binary person, and I know that for a lot of folks, people are very nervous about saying the right thing. They're like, oh my God, I'm not going to say the right thing. I'm not going to say your pronouns correctly. And a lot of people find a lot of discomfort with it, not within the LGBTQ community even, right? And so I think that I can share a little bit about what being non-binary means to me. And for me, it is about allowing myself to exist kind of in this way that this expression, embracing the fullness of my range and expression in a way that goes beyond the parameters of man, beyond the parameters of woman, right? That's what it means to me, that I can embrace what we call femininity or what we call masculinity and flow in and out of that, and that I don't feel, for me, restricted to the gendered concept of a man and a woman. Even though people can, of course, embrace those concepts and be in them however they would like, for me, I find the concept of gender kind of like restricting on my being. And so I like to embrace myself and call myself non-binary, right? And so one thing I would say to people is, you know, I know it can be very nerve-wracking when people are kind of identifying in ways that are unfamiliar. Like I'm in very intergenerational spaces with Black people, and some of the elder Black folks are like, now what that, I don't know what that, like, you know, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of sincerity.
You're a boy, like, what are you?
Right, exactly. And you know, we try to break it down for folks. I tell people all the time, like, you know, the idea of man and woman hasn't always existed historically the way we think it has, right? When we look at Western Africa, there's a lot of great research that talks about how people weren't necessarily assigned like through gender. It was really about age, which if you think about Black people, you probably believe that was really true in some cultures, right? There was a lot more hierarchy around age than it was around gendered concepts, right? And so I think it's just important that if you have questions, you know, like, you know, to approach with humility, to approach with humility, to not make assumptions, you know what I mean, to approach with kindness. And I find that many of us, if you come from that perspective, you know, you will be, even though you will be hurt in a way, but like, even though it can be exhausting sometimes, you know, to be a person who's kind of always answering those questions, I'm not going to lie. But I mean, I think that, that is a part of like being a part of a minority experience in the United States too, you know? So just naming those pieces.
It's like, you know, can't even touch your hair. But I'm just loving telling people I'm cisgender, heterosexual Black woman, and people are like, what? Well, yeah.
I love that you're doing that. And you're such, first of all, I just want to say thank you to you. You're such an amazing ally, such an amazing, like, and just a great example to other heterosexual cisgender folks about how to be an ally, how to be an accomplice, and how to support in a loving and supportive way. So I just want to say thank you to you for that as well.
Well, I got to bring on someone else into this conversation. She's been waiting patiently. Her name is Sharita Gruberg. She's an attorney and vice president of the LGBTQ Research and Communications Project at the Center for American Progress. Good morning and welcome, Sharita.
Good morning.
You know, Sharita, we've been talking about representation. We've been talking about the advances that have been made from a legislative standpoint in the gay community, particularly the 2015, you know, decision that allowed for gay marriages. But I'm also very concerned about these headlines where, you know, state legislatures around the country are, you know, introducing these laws that seem to target the gay community in ways that could set, you know, the community back decades. Tell us what's going on. Why all of a sudden the target, these anti-gay bills, why are they being introduced in so many states?
Yeah, so this is the most anti-LGBTQ legislative session we've had in recent history. Right now, as we're speaking, Ohio is considering a ban on trans kids playing student sports. And as you said, we've seen hundreds of these pop up in state legislatures around the country. And this is not an organic thing. What's happening is the anti-LGBTQ equality organizations, the far-right groups that spent years opposing marriage equality, have kind of regrouped and renewed their attacks. So, for example, a lot of these bills targeting trans kids' ability to play sports were written by the Alliance Defending Freedom, which was started by Alan Sears, who wrote the book called The Homosexual Agenda. That's all about how gay people are trying to corrupt children. Mm-hmm. And so these are the types of forces that are behind the attacks that we're seeing across the country right now.
And Yolo, I read an article that said about 88 major corporations have stood up to oppose a lot of this anti-transgender legislation, companies like Facebook, American Airlines, Apple. But do you think major corporations are doing enough in terms of trying to push back on these legislatures?
You know, I would say...
Oh, sorry.
I would say I'm so grateful for the folks who have made us take a stance and not being silent. I think that there's definitely more work that can be done to really kind of voice and protect our children, because trans kids, Black trans kids, particularly Latinx trans kids, are so vulnerable to so many different issues. And so I think that there's definitely more that can be done in terms of like advocating, fighting back against these laws and legislation, but also ensuring that we shift social culture to protect our folks on a local level, in schools and all these other spaces. So there's definitely more that could be done. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add that it's so important to acknowledge that when your rights and your right to exist is being battled in courts, and you're a young child in your developmental stages, right? Like learning who you are, the ways in which that increases everything from ideations to depression to anxiety, it's considerable. So this is a mental health crisis when we see folks debating over the legitimacy of people's existence, right? Are there a right to play sports, or just be able to like engage in a variety of activities? This is a mental health crisis, and like when the people are doing these things, they are harming our folks on multiple levels.
Yeah, and this really goes beyond, Sharita, playing sports and even using bathrooms. I see in Arkansas there's a bill that's being considered that would even ban the discussion of LGBTQ people in classrooms.
Yeah, these so-called no promo homo laws that are really geared at the existence of LGBTQ people and the acknowledgement of our existence. Unfortunately, we're seeing those as well popping up across the country.
Do you think the Biden administration, I mean, we know what happened under the former administration and the hostility towards the gay community in the former administration, but do you think the current Biden-Harris administration is doing enough to fight back at the federal level, or at least to affirm the rights of gay people at the federal level?
I mean, they've been incredibly vocal. They just filed briefs in opposition to some of these trans bans that we've seen in West Virginia and Arkansas, and I expect we'll see them weighing in even more of these. They've been very clear that the Affordable Care Act prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Another thing we're seeing in the states is attempts to criminalize doctors for treating trans children. Just the extremism is horrific, but the administration has been very clear. We've heard the president say time and time again that trans rights are human rights, LGBTQ rights are human rights, and so this really has been one of the most pro-LGBTQ administrations we've ever seen. But we, as Yolo said, we always need more support, more folks to be vocal, and this is the time to really stand up for the community.
With that, Yolo, I'll ask you the last question. Our segment, we're running out of time. This is Pride Month, and every month should be about advancing, equality and fighting back against discrimination against any group of people. But in particular, during Pride Month, what do you want people to do? What can they do to be allies?
Yeah. I want to encourage folks who are interested in being allies, or as I like to say sometimes, accomplices as well, to LGBTQ communities. I want to encourage you to get vocal where you are at, right? Find out what's going on, if there are trans bans or other legislation. Like, get involved in the efforts, support the efforts of organizations that are doing this critical work. Have conversations with your folks if you're in various different spaces to make sure that you're taking the steps to protect LGBTQ youth and kids around you particularly, right? So to educating yourself, finding out organizations you can support, finding out what's happening on a local level in your community that you can actually be an advocate for. Those are some pieces that I will offer. And then for queer folks, I would say, protect your joy, protect your peace, protect your pride, center your healing, know that you are beautiful, and find the folks who will help uplift that and affirm that for you every day, despite what is happening in the legislature or in other parts of the country. Find those folks and hold that center of joy.
All right, we got to end it there. Thank you so much, Yolo. Thank you, Sharita. Keep fighting that good fight. The American Center for Progress is doing amazing work, and we look forward to continuing to follow the work that you're doing and hopefully the wins that you'll have as a result of that work. Again, thank you all for joining me this morning. Wow, what an inspiring show, from Dr. Dove to Eduardo to Yolo to Sharita. All of these people from all different walks of life, all different cities around this country are living their best lives. They are standing in the gap for young folks who are maybe not sure of what their sexual identity is, those who are sure but who are experiencing the kind of discrimination that we heard our guest today talk about. So I just want to thank them for sharing their personal stories and also for their advocacy. That is so critically important. And if you are out there and struggling with your identity, or you have come out as gay or lesbian and you've been discriminated against, or you've been the subject of any kind of violence, please, please, please reach out to the many, many organizations that are around the country that are supporting gay rights and lesbian rights and who are supporting the LGBTQ community. You are, as you've heard each of my guests say, you are worthy and you are deserving to live your life and to make the choices that you want as it relates to sex and relationships and love and, you know, your job, your health care. You are as deserving and worthy of that as I am and as any other individual in this country that calls themselves an American. Just some words to live by before I get out. Although June is Gay Pride Month, we should use every month of the year to fight for the equal rights of all people, including people who are a part of the LGBTQ community. And here are 5 things that you can do to support that community. 1, be an ally. As you heard Yolo say, he calls it an accomplice. But when someone in your life tells you that they think they're gay or they are having feelings that suggest they're gay or lesbian, listen to them. Don't judge them, support them, and offer whatever assistance that you can, because as you've heard, this is not an easy journey. Individuals that come out as gay are not only ostracized from their communities, they are often attacked by their own parents, their own families, the people that they thought loved them and who were there to protect them. So please, please, please support them. Number 2, become an advocate. I just love what Eduardo said about going beyond getting his parents to accept him and his sister, but he is helping his parents to become advocates. He's helping his parents understand that they have a voice and that as parents of a gay and lesbian children, that they should be out speaking up for the gay and lesbian community. So all of us can become advocates. We can start a affinity group at our office. We can do something to show our support for this community. Number 3, educate yourself. Spend some time learning the history of Pride. Learn the history of the Stonewall riots of 1969. Learn about all the influential folks in the White House who have come out as gay and lesbian. It's not just Pete Buttigieg. There are lots of folks who are at the highest level of our government who have come out as gay and lesbian. So lots of things that you can do to educate yourself. Number 4, end the hate. You know, when someone makes a homophobic comment to you or a joke, don't laugh, correct them. Check them in the same way that you would check them if they made a racial slur, because that's how we end the hate and the discrimination and the violence against members of the LGBTQ community. And number 5, donate and volunteer. Find a local organization that serves LGBTQ youth and get involved. There's so much that you can offer to these organizations, and you don't have to have a lot of money. If you have $10, $15, $20, $25, that's enough. Nonprofits thrive on donations, and they thrive on volunteer service. In short, be a part of the solution. I'm out, y'all. Celebrate Pride, be safe, and remember, we are all in this together.